For years, I've preached the life saving hack of batching. But as I've gained experience, my perspective has switched just a little. It's time we got honest about batching. Is it all it's cracked up to be? Is it really possible? And what are the alternatives?
Being an online business owner is full of ups and downs. Some days you can't imagine going back to your 9 to 5, and other days you want to burn your whole business to the ground. We get it.
Welcome to Chaos to Conversions, a podcast of practical, no BS strategies to grow your online business. Each week, we're chatting about launching, copywriting, mindset, and more, so you can make sense of the chaos and do more of what works.
Join the conversation and let's grow together.
Welcome back to Chaos to Conversions. As I mentioned, today we're talking about batching. And I want to start this episode by saying that it's totally okay to change your opinion. And maybe I'm just talking to myself here. Maybe that's just a note for me. Because I'll be really honest, I used to have a very strong opinion about batching. I felt like batching was the only way to plan and to stick with your content. I thought everyone needed to get on the batching train. And I think part of that really strong opinion came from what I was hearing from others. It's just a really common narrative. But also it's because I've seen a lot of advantages to batching. So I feel like people are saying it's great. I've seen how great it is. So shouldn't we all just be batching? That just seems like the thing to do. And I truly do believe that batching is a really powerful strategy for your business. It can take a lot of pressure off your plate. It's an easy way to stay consistent with content. If you've ever been able to batch out a lot of content at once, you've probably seen how much easier it is to stick with things. Just easier to show up when you know you already have something ready to go. So I still believe that batching is the goal to aim for. But I think that there's a reason that so many people ask, how do you batch? I don't think it's because we don't really know how. I think a lot of us do have an understanding of what batching is. I think that question comes about a lot because batching just hasn't worked for a lot of us. And I'll throw myself in there. As my business has become busier, as I've set boundaries with myself as to when I will and will not work, batching has just felt really impossible now that I've kind of set those boundaries for myself and said, yeah, after this time, I don't want to work anymore. I want to be able to have evenings free. Well, that was when I was doing a lot of my batching, was the evenings and the weekends. So that has become really hard lately. So what do you do then? What do you do when batching hasn't worked, when you feel like, am I missing some piece of this strategy? We know batching can relieve stress. We know that it makes writing emails and blogs feel so much easier. And yet most of us just don't have the time or the drive to sit down and bang them out. So what do you do then? That's what we're going to talk about. So I think the first thing to do to try to make batching work, or at least find an alternative if batching hasn't worked for you, is we need to rethink traditional batching. Typically, we're told batching means dedicating time to do a bunch of tasks together, particularly similar tasks together. So you might batch your keyword research for your SEO blogs, and then you might batch write your blogs. Or you might batch your email planning, like maybe you sit down and plan all your emails for the month, and then you sit down to batch write your emails. That's what we've been told. Typically, that's what batching looks like, is grouping tasks together so that there's not so much switching between tasks that slow you down. But if we're being really for real, I think for me, what I found was hard about this traditional approach to batching and what I've seen clients struggle with as well. There's a really big time difference between doing something like batching keywords versus batch writing blogs. For example, I could sit down and do keyword research for 2 different blog posts. That might take me 15 to 30 minutes. Okay, I can find 15 to 30 minutes in my day to do that. Not too hard. But sitting down to actually batch write 2 blog posts, that could easily take me an hour, 2 hours, depending on how long the blog is, how much research I need to do, all those different factors. And maybe you have shorter blogs, maybe it takes you 30 to 45 minutes, but still, that's a big difference between 15 minutes and 45 minutes to an hour. So when you're looking at batching tasks where we're having to carve out an hour to several hours in a row to write, that's when batching can get a little bit complicated. And I know you might be thinking, okay, well then don't write both blogs at one time. Well, then that wouldn't really be batching, right? If we're doing them separately. Or, okay, I don't write all 4 emails at one time. True, I could split them up, but still finding that dedicated time for those longer writing tasks, because they do tend to be very brain heavy task as well. It's not easy for me, at least after I've spent 4 or 5 hours doing client work all day to then sit down and say, okay, I'm going to spend another hour writing. My brain is tired at that point. So that's also a struggle that comes with batching. So, do you have the time to actually sit down and batch these items? And do you even want to be doing that? Do you have the energy to do it at the time that you've set aside, like the evenings or the weekends, or after you've done a full day of work? So, instead of feeling like we have to fit into this traditional system of batching, what I think we should do, the best way to handle this batching conundrum, is to drop whatever routine you think you're supposed to be doing and instead find one that actually works for you. So, for example, when I started this podcast, I found myself batch recording a lot of podcasts and then finding time later to write the blogs and emails that went along with the podcast episode. That's what traditional blogging said I should do, right? Group your podcasts, group your emails, group your blogs. But what I found was that it actually worked a lot better for me to lump kind of connected things together. For example, I would record a podcast episode, then write the email that I would use to go along with that podcast episode and write the blog or do the SEO research along with that as well, all at one time. Now, I may not be able to do it back to back, but within a very close time frame, because after I've recorded, the information was really fresh on my mind. So it was a lot easier for me to write that blog post or create that email. And it took me less time. I could knock out an email in 15 minutes after I just spent 20 minutes talking into a microphone about that topic, right? Whereas if you'd asked me to write the email a few weeks later, which is how I had been doing it, I was having to drag myself, putting a lot of energy into it. It would take me 30 plus minutes to write that same email. So by doing this different way, different form of batching, I was able to save myself time, find the better energy to do it, a better mindset to do it in, and it was just a lot easier for me. But again, I had to think a little bit outside of what I felt like traditional batching was saying I should do. With that in mind, here are a couple different batching systems that you might consider. So the first one is that you can stick with traditional batching and maybe just add your own spin on it. Maybe you still do want to write all of your blogs together at one time, all of your emails together at one time, whatever it might be. Throw your own spin on it. Maybe you give yourself a reward every time you write. Maybe you do like a Pomodoro method. Just some sort of little twist to make that traditional batching work for you. Great. Awesome. Not saying there's anything wrong with that. If it works for you, then do it. Do what works for you. Another way you could batch is to dedicate a time block each week to content writing. So maybe at the very beginning of the day, like at 9 a.m., your brain is functioning at its best. And you're like, okay, every single day at 9 a.m., I'm going to spend 1 hour writing content. Or every single Wednesday for the first half of the day, I'm going to spend a certain amount of time writing content. Or if you do have a 9 to 5 and you're doing your business on the side, maybe you have a specific weekend day, maybe a couple hours in the morning before your kids get up, or a dedicated evening where you spend time writing. Again, whatever works for you, but you might have a time block where you set it aside in your calendar and that's when you're going to spend time writing your content or batching your content. The next thing kind of goes along with what I just said, which is writing at a time you feel most inspired. For me, I work best in the mornings. My brain is fresh in the mornings. I would much rather start working at 8 a.m., 7 a.m., and be done by 3 or 4, because by that time my brain is dead. Like I said, I don't do well writing my content at the end of the day because I'm tired. I can't think of really good email ideas and I just don't want to think of them. So that is not a good time for me to batch. But if I can dedicate an hour in the morning or 30 minutes in the morning, whatever that looks like for you at a time when your brain is most online and most creative, that is probably the best time you should be batching. Number 4, you can always hire someone to help. I know that we don't always have the funds to do that, or we're using our funds in an area where we feel like is a bigger priority in our business. That's totally fine. But if you find yourself constantly struggling to keep up with the amount of content that you have to produce, it may be worth your time. It may be worth your money to hire someone to do it. For example, when someone hires me to write their emails for them, I batch all of those emails a month beforehand. For instance, right now I'm filming this or recording this at the end of September, and I've been writing all of my clients' content for October. So before October even starts, they have all the emails they're going to send out, the blogs they're going to send out, whatever that might be that I'm writing for them. They just have to schedule it or have me schedule it, and it's good to go. It takes a big stressor off their plate, and they know that that content's going to be going out. They're not going to be missing emails. They're not going to be getting behind because it is already done. The next thing is to knock it out in a day at the beginning or the end of a month, like a CEO day. So you might find a dedicated time that every single month you say, okay, on the first of the month, I am just knocking out all of the content. That may feel like a really long day for you, but hey, you're like, if I get it done, that's great. So again, that just depends on if you feel like you're going to be able to dedicate a whole day to just doing content or if that's going to be too tiring for you, but that might be a good strategy. Another thing is to co-work and write. If you're someone who, again, struggles with maybe feeling inspired while you're writing or struggles to have the energy, but maybe you only have a certain time of day when you can write, then co-working might be a good way to keep you focused and on task to get those batching items out of the way. And then kind of the last strategy that I had in mind was to batch a few weeks at a time. Maybe you're like, I don't want to have to be writing every single day, but I also can't just do like a whole month's worth of content at one time in one go. Totally fine. You can batch a few weeks at a time. So maybe you can sit down and write 2 emails. That gets you 2 weeks ahead. Maybe you can sit down and write 3 emails. That gets you 3 weeks ahead. Whatever it might be that you're like, I can do a few weeks out. I can't do maybe the whole month, but I can get a little bit ahead. That's still going to take a lot of stress off your plate. At the end of the day, though, it's all going to come down to just experimenting what works for you. And remember that in each season of your life, you might need different things. Again, when my schedule wasn't as busy, traditional batching did work for me, but nowadays I dedicate specific times during my CEO days or after I record a podcast like this to sit down and write. Now, I want to kind of wrap up this episode with what I'm calling the big caveat. I feel like I always have a big caveat to every podcast episode, but it's because every system and strategy is different, but there's always kind of an important piece to remember. And when it comes to batching, like I said at the beginning of this episode, the goal is to batch. So I know that batching can be hard when we think about it in the traditional sense. Okay, I'm going to sit down and knock out all of my emails for the whole month. That's okay if that doesn't work for you, but you still want to come up with a system that helps you get ahead with your emails. No, you don't have to have an entire month of emails written before the month begins, but you do need to find a system that works for you. That system can be whatever it is that works for you, but a system is necessary. When you're willy-nilly writing your emails, you're going to miss deadlines, you're going to begin to let things slide. And that does have consequences with it. You could lose the engagement of your subscribers, and you could add extra stress to your plate that you just don't need. So to recap, there's a lot of pressure on us to have our content before the month begins, or to at least be really far out with our content. And while that's definitely the goal that I would aim for, and I would recommend you aim for, it will save you so much time and stress. That's not always possible. Instead, find a system that works for you and keeps you consistent and at least a little bit ahead. Don't be afraid to experiment with the system until you find one that you like. If you would like someone to batch write your content for you, then let's chat. With my retainer copywriting services, I deliver emails and possibly your blogs the month before. This allows you to plan ahead, schedule your emails, and let them automate themselves. It is the best feeling. Head to therelevantcollective.com/retainer for more information or find the link in the show notes.
Thanks so much for joining the conversation today. If you want to learn more about how we can work together on email marketing, launch copy, or content planning, head to therelevantcollective.com. I'll meet you back here next Tuesday for more practical strategies to take your business from chaos to conversions.